Weddings move fast, and as a photographer you don't get second chances. Having the right camera settings can be the difference between capturing magic or missing the moment entirely. In this video I'll break down the best camera settings for weddings so you can shoot with confidence. Hi, I'm Stefano Casati, a wedding photographer and videographer specializing in destination weddings in Italy. I've shot almost 200 weddings since 2012, and today I'll share my go-to camera settings to get beautiful photos every time. First, let's set up your camera for a wedding day. Shooting mode, manual. I personally shoot in manual mode 99% of the time for complete control over exposure and style. If you're just starting, aperture priority AAV mode on your camera can help you react quickly, but I'll highly recommend learning to shoot manual to keep consistency throughout the day. File format, RAW. I always shoot RAW. It gives you full flexibility in post-production. JPEG? Yeah, but only if you need quick delivery previews. Focus mode, continuous AF. I don't want blurry shots, unless it's a stylistic choice. I highly suggest using continuous AF. AI servo on Canon, AFC on Sony or Nikon, to track moving subjects like the bride walking down the aisle, for example. In this way, you can focus on what's happening in front of you rather than worrying about whether your shot is sharp. White balance, auto or manual. Since you're shooting RAW, it really doesn't matter much, but auto white balance is a great starting point to get decent previews, at least on the back of your camera, you know. Personally, I shoot in manual white balance most of the time, adjusting based on the scene. I'll probably make a video dedicated on this topic soon, so stay tuned. Now, let's go through different parts of the wedding day and the best settings for each. My rule of thumb is to start with a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second. An aperture between f2 and f2.8, and then adjust the ISO based on the overall ambient light and the situation. Let me be very clear here. I think that there are two kinds of photographers. Okay, one group prefers super duper sharp images, while the other embraces more movement and goes for more blurry shots. There is no right or wrong with either style. Okay, so it's mostly about personal preference and being clear with your clients about the type of final images that you will deliver and they can expect from you. Okay, so that being said, I believe that there is time for both sharp and more soft, blurry photos. I don't despise at all a slightly blurry photo, nor do I stress too much over achieving perfect sharpness while zooming in, 400% to pixel peeping the image. My only advice is to understand your own style and adjust your shutter speed accordingly. 1/100th of a second is my go-to shutter speed, but keep in mind that if the subject is moving or moving fast, there is a chance of slightly blurry images, which I actually like. If you're more focused on freezing motion, stick to 1/200th or even faster settings. So now let's break down my settings for each part of the day. Getting ready, natural light or mixed light. For the getting ready, I typically set my aperture within a range of f2, f2.8 in order to achieve a shallow depth of field for dreamy and beautiful portraits. The shutter speed, here is my rule of thumb. Again, it's 1/100th of a second. But I find myself going slower, even to 1/30th of a second, or making it fast up to maybe 1/160th of a second if there is some kind of action, happening that I want to make sure I freeze. For ISO, 400 to 2000 is generally the range I find myself working the most. And A tip here is to use window lighting and avoid direct artificial lighting when possible. Also, using flash is not forbidden, okay, nor is using video LED lights when needed. Ceremony: bright outdoor, dim churches or venues. So here aperture is the same for the getting ready. Something between f to f2.8 will work. Shutter speed, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. The first part, like walking down the aisle, is generally when I use a faster shutter speed. One thing to note is that if the ceremony is taking place outdoor, on a bright sunny day, for example, your shutter speed will likely be cranked up. Let's say 1/4000 of a second or something similar. So you won't have to worry about your blurry shots. Okay, everything will be freezed. If you're shooting indoors on the other side or in a church, for example, I recommend not going below 1/100th or even 1/200th of a second when the subject is moving, and giving yourself some flexibility with slow shutter speed instead for static moments like when people are talking or standing in front of each other. ISO, again, it really depends if it's outdoor bright sunny day or it's dark indoor. Okay, probably the range will be around 100 ISO for when it's bright, and maybe above 1000 or even 6400 for indoors. My advice is to use a fast prime lens, especially when working indoor, something like f1.4, 1.8 when shooting in churches or in dark venues, in order to avoid relying too much on flash. This is where you want to open your aperture as wide as possible. You can choose to work with your f2.8 zoom, or if you feel more confident, go for prime lenses like 35, 50 or 85 millimeters that allow you to open the aperture up to 1.8, 1.4 or wider, in order to create beautiful portraits and to keep your ISO as low as possible. For the shutter speed, it's again a matter of style. Crank it up for sharp photos or let it slow down for more stylistic images. My recommendation is always take a few more normal shots and not go too crazy with slow shutter speed. Make sure that your clients will have a variety of options and always balance the blurry photos with the more standard ones. Group photos, family formals, and photos with friends. Here, people will be standing in front of you, so there is no movement to control. However, just before and after the formal shots, there is a good opportunity to capture more natural and candid moments. For this kind of shots, I generally work with shutter speed of around 1/250th of a second. I want everybody to be sharp when posing and also get some decent and sharp candid photos. This setting also comes from the maximum sync speed of the flash that I use on camera in order to light people's faces, On a bright sunny day, I often find myself using 1/250th of a second for the shutter speed, something between f5.6, f8 for the aperture, and ISO 100. Reception, low light dinners. Generally, during cocktail hours and dinner, I prefer to shoot more candid shots, which is why I avoid using flash whenever possible. I want people to fully enjoy their moments, and especially during intimate weddings dinner, I prefer using fast prime lenses to capture more lights and avoid distracting flash lighting. Sometimes it's so dark that even when using the 85 1.8 lens, I often find myself raising the ISO. To avoid too much noise, I also lower the shutter speed, sometimes to 1/80th of a second or even 1/50th of a second. In some cases, I do expect some motion blur, of course, which I actually like, but at the same time, I always make sure to capture some more standard shots, again, with a shutter speed of 1/100 or even faster. When shooting in a nice venue with a light colored ceiling, sometimes I mix flash When I do so, I always bounce it off of the ceiling and I aim to add just a touch of extra light. I want this extra shot to blend seamlessly with the other flash-free photos in the gallery. In the future, probably I will create a dedicated video about how I use the flash at wedding receptions, and if you're interested in that, let me know down in the comments below. First dance and party. This chapter may deserve a bit more of time, but let's touch on the main concept here. For the first dance, and especially the party, I always use two setup systems. The first setup relies on the available lighting on the dance floor and on some off-camera flash. The second setup involves direct flash with a long shutter speed. Basically, the first setup aims to freeze the motion, while the second one aims more to creative shots and more dynamic ones. That being said, my advice is not to go too heavy on the more stylistic shots. Always make sure you get some classic standard photos, even if you think they're a little bit more boring, but it's good for the client to have variety and to be able to choose from many of them. This part of the day is a lot of fun for me. I always enjoy capturing people dancing. I think that maybe a dedicated video on this would be very interesting as well. To be honest, I would love to hear on how you handle the party section of the day and what are your favorite lighting techniques. Let me know if you use the same settings or if you have any suggestion for me and also for the other photographers who will watch this video. Okay, before we wrap up, here are a few quick tips to make sure that your camera settings are dialed in. First of all, always check your histogram. Okay, don't trust your LCD screen. It may look brighter or darker than actual exposure. So especially if you're shooting in bright sunlight or at night during an intimate dinner. Videographers are more used to checking exposure through the waveform and the histogram, but I have found that it's really useful tool for photographers as well. Common mistake number 1, slow shutter speed in low light. If your shutter speed is too slow, let's say under 1/100th of a second, you will get motion blur. Okay, so again, unless it's a stylistic choice, try not to shoot with a longer exposure than 1/100th of a second. Common mistake number 2, overexposed highlights. Brights wear white. Protect the highlights so you don't lose details in the dress, especially if you shoot digital. You have to be very careful of the highlights. Even if you're shooting in RAW, it doesn't mean that you will be able to recover every detail of the image, so be very careful. Common mistake number 3, shooting with unnecessarily fast shutter speed and ending up using too high ISO. I've seen this so many times. Try always to understand what is fast enough for you, okay, based on your subject speed, and then lower your ISO as much as possible for cleaner, higher quality images. Okay, that's it. Those are my best camera settings for wedding photography. If you found this helpful, hit the like button and subscribe, because I'll be sharing even more wedding photography tips very soon. So, until next time, stay inspired, keep creating beautiful moments, and see you soon.